Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the Sales Players Podcast. All right, hey everybody, this is David Craig White, your host here on the Sales Players Podcast, and today I'm delighted to have Chris on the show, Chris Hatfield. He is the founder and chief coach, I would say, at the Sales Psyche. Is it Sales Psyche or Sales Psych, Chris? Psyche?
Sales Psyche, yes.
That's the E, right? All right, cool. So today we're going to talk about sales and mental health. I'm really excited about this one because it's not one which is covered very often. I've been following Chris for a short while. He came across my feed on LinkedIn. Surprise, surprise. It's usually how we all meet, right? And I reached out to him straight away as soon as I saw what he was doing because it's super interesting. And I think, to be honest, I'm looking forward to squeezing you of every valuable piece of information and tips you've got for the audience today, Chris. So, but first of all, thanks for coming on. How's things?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me on. Really excited and great to hear like people like yourself providing a platform for me to talk about this.
Excellent. So, first of all, Chris, just for the audience, Sales Psyche, give us a bit of a background, sort of like where did that come from? What do you do? So the audience are aware of that. I put a quick post out this morning to give a bit of an insight, but of course not everybody will see that.
Yeah, sure. So where to start? I think it all starts with me falling into sales like most people did back in the day, really. And it's nice to sort of see, I suppose, a bit more intention about moving into sales these days, but that's a different story. I fell into sales and realized I struggled quite heavily with anxiety that sort of crippled me. And my first ever sales job was a door-to-door, 100% commission only, solar panels, loft and cavity wall insulation kind of gig. If you didn't sell, you didn't earn, basically. At all. You didn't even get a base. So yeah, that kind of first of all was really crippling, and it sort of made me feel like I don't want to just give up on this because of my anxiety. I want to better understand myself, and I'd gone to uni and done sports coaching, so I'd always had that kind of interest in that development side of things. So I thought, well, let's use myself as a bit of an experiment and do things a bit differently. So I took a personal interest around it, and you sort of fast forward, and I'm happy to come back to that bit in between, but sort of 13, 14 years later, I'd seen I was head of sales enablement for a fintech company. I'd always had quite a passion. I'd started a podcast and a side gig of like speaking and talking because I'd seen in sales, as you mentioned at the start, there's a lot of stuff around like skill set and, you know, what you need to do, what you need to say, but not much around well, what's going on between those two ears. And like, that's the most important conversation you have with yourself. And if you don't understand yourself, you're not going to be able to understand anyone else around you. So it was the pandemic, and I'd seen that it had allowed us to talk more about mental health, but still very much from a reactive point of view, waiting for someone to be burnt out, not motivated, not hitting target, thinking of leaving or left before doing something. So I wanted to kind of create something that was more of a preventative and proactive approach rather than waiting for the headache to happen and going, hey, here's the paracetamol. Is how do you stop the headache from happening in the first place? So that's where Sales Psyche came from. It's a combination of us working with companies to provide them with one-to-one confidential days where anyone in the business can come in and book a coaching session. It's not therapy or counseling, but they can speak to someone who's been in sales and talk about anything from their mindset and mental health, anything from burnout, imposter syndrome, performance anxiety, limiting beliefs, all those good things that come up quite regularly in sales, but we don't really want to talk about sometimes. And then secondly, we provide live and on-demand sessions and also bespoke workshops to train people and give them a better understanding of their mindset and how to take a more proactive approach around it.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to come back to you on those specific topics, what you're talking about there, because those are the things I'd like to just introduce the topic to the audience, because there's things like imposter syndrome. Tons of people have heard about it. Probably 9 out of 10 people have no idea what it actually is. So stuff like that is exactly sort of what I'd love for us to sort of share with the audience today. But just rolling back, you've obviously it's very, very typical of anybody. I knew straight away, like anybody who moves into the space of mental health and tries to help out, you always know it's done because they've witnessed this in the past. and it's motivated them. They've got out of it, and it's motivated them to be like, shit, other people out there are struggling with this, and nobody's helping them. Because you probably had the same struggle yourself. Where do I find help for this? So what's your opinion right now on sort of the level of awareness and how much focus and acceptance companies are putting on this? Because especially when you work in sales, if you say you have a mental health issue when you work in sales, I think, let's be honest, probably 9.5 out of 10 sales leaders out there would be like, oh, they're weak. They shouldn't be working in sales. You can't talk about mental health issues if you've got a weak mindset. So that mindset thing, like it's like you say, the mindset has always been something what has been part of any training sessions and coaching sessions of the past and the present. Everybody always talks about mindset, but it's always about like having the right mindset, a positive mindset, and a champion's mindset. But people never talk about the mindset also, which is the negative side, where sometimes you have to come from, and sometimes, very often, pretty much, I think everybody in sales at some point struggles with anxiety, for example, and other issues. But yet it's never talked about, and it's still very sort of taboo, if you like. And still, I think in most organizations, you can maybe correct me, I'm sure you're working with some right now who are changing. But what's your sort of view on the current attitude of companies when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think it is evolving. I think, I one of the spaces I work quite heavily in is the SaaS space. And I do see this evolving. I think that is somewhere where you're seeing sort of, I suppose, a new age of founders as well coming in and almost sort of seeing and experiencing what they've gone through in their career and kind of wanting to change that. So, I think there are a lot more leaders. They're not, to your point, there is still probably, the minority of those people doing that.
Yeah.
But it is always interesting, I think, and I hear it all the time, and I've been witness to it, that winning mindset, growth mindset, you've got to be resilient. But I think most people misunderstand resilience in the first place, in that a lot of people believe it's about being strong, but it's not. It's about being adaptable and telling yourself that, if you've got something going on that you're weak is such the wrong way of looking at it. I mean, I always go back to physical health as an example, and how we should view the two the same and treat them the same is, most people will watch football or any sport or the Commonwealth Games that's just been on, and if someone is injured, you don't see them as weak. You see these athletes that train every single day, and you're like, well, they're top performers, but if they get an injury, you're like, oh, that's a shame. Unlucky for them. Like, I hope they recover soon. Like that guy who broke his fibula, I think, is out for 3 months. No one's going, oh, like he's weak. He should have, look at him. No. And that's the same. How we should see mental health is, particularly in sales, where we are pushing and pushing and pushing. There are going to be things, there are variables each day. And when those things happen, it shouldn't be a case of, oh, you're weak. It should be, no wonder, like, look what's going on here. How do we best support you?
Yeah, absolutely. And inside of organizations, sort of, in my experience, like I said, it has always been sort of that view of weakness. And of course, as we spoke about just before we hit the record button today, sort of when I got into my coaching, I moved into doing a lot of one-on-one coaching with people outside of sales and off the sales topic. And I learned there sort of, the depths of how complex mental health can be. And I think also it's funny you mentioned like the physical exercise, because working from home and COVID, like you said, it's no surprise that all of a sudden triggered an extra sort of batch of mental health issues for people, because I've done it. I've even in the last sort of 3-4 months, when I've gone back into running my own business, you find yourself sat at the same place every day. You're working your ass off, doing 12, 18-hour days some days, and you're literally like, did I move from my desk apart from to go grab a cup of coffee? And then all of a sudden, it's only in the last sort of like 10 days, I've actually been like, oh, damn, I need to go out. I need to go walk. I need to get some like exercise into me. I need to keep healthy. And like, as soon as you start to go into it, then you realize like how much of a switch it is on the mental side, right? So it's like that combination there of just getting out of the house, getting the mind sort of fresh. It really, like, the physical exercise has this knock-on effect where it really, really empowers the mental side as well. And again, those are things what I've literally not seen zip when it comes to sort of online content about that stuff. It's always just the same stuff. Hey, what's the best call openers when you're an SDR? Keep yourself motivated when you're working from home, or let's set up a dashboard and compete virtually against each other. It's kind of like, well, no, actually, you can probably get more out of your team if you actually just say, hey, let's take a time out and let's all go for let's do an audio Zoom call or something. Go put your running trainers on or your walking trainers and go for a walk while we all have a team session or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just, people are just not thinking about that, because I think people underestimate the sort of power on the brain of the physical activity, right? The physical exercise. It's really huge.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's so important to mix it up, and I found that as well. I've been running Sales Psyche for nearly 2 years now, and it is important to bring that variety to your life. And even though naturally it's thinking, wherever you are in sales, if you're behind, you think, oh, I can't have a break because I'll be further behind. If I'm ahead, I can't lose momentum. It's a bit like an F1 race. The analogy I often use is, they'll never feel like there's a right time in an F1 race, but if you don't do it, you're going to burn out, your tires are going to go, and you're going to run out of fuel.
Yeah, good analogy. I'd say exactly spot on. Yeah, cool, Chris. So let's dig in. Let's dig in here on some of these topics. What you talk about and you cover a lot in your coaching sessions, and obviously when you're speaking with people. Imposter syndrome. Let's start with that. So for the audience, what is imposter syndrome, and what can people do to avoid it or handle it better? Let's say sometimes you can't just avoid and get rid of stuff. Sometimes you just have to learn how to manage it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think to sort of, I suppose, to put it in really sort of layman's terms, is that kind of feeling that any moment now you're going to get tapped on the shoulder. If you're working from home, you're going to get a Slack message, or someone's going to email you and go, do you know what? We found out you're not as good as what we thought you were. You're out. You're done. It's that kind of constant feeling of, no matter how much you know, how much you learn, how much you do, that you're out of your depth. You don't fit in. You're not right in that situation. There's actually, I think with all of this, it's about understanding it more. And there's actually 4 different types of imposters that we can experience, and we can actually be a mix of all of them. The first one is the perfectionist, which we all know is very common, most talked about one. Even people say, oh, I can't help it, I'm a perfectionist. But a perfectionist and doing your best are very different things, and that in itself is a separate conversation. So I won't delve too much into that one. The second one is the expert. So this is that feeling where you need to have all the information, no matter how much you know. There always needs to be more training, more understanding. It often leads to that kind of analysis paralysis, fear of, oh, what happens if someone asks a question I don't know the answer to? Third one is natural genius. So this is the feeling where you need to get things right first time round. So you'll often give up on things that don't come easy. You'll avoid trying things in and outside of work, like new sales approaches or new hobbies, because you think if you don't master it first time round, it's not the task is too difficult, it's that you're not good enough, and you never will be. And then the fourth one is the workaholic. So this is the feeling that no matter how much I work, I'm never going to be as intelligent or as good as anyone else around me in the team. So I need to constantly be on overdrive. I need to be the first one in, last one out. I need to put my hand up for everything. I need to be involved with everything, even if I've got everything on my plate already. And they're all quite dangerous from a management perspective, but this one could be, because obviously on the face of it, you could think, oh, this person looks really committed. They're really involved. They really like pushing. But it's, not saying don't encourage those behaviors, but it's about asking what's driving them behind it. If it's the imposter, then it's not a healthy thing. So there's a few things to I suppose, manage the imposter. I think first of all, which I talk a lot about with emotions like stress and anxiety, is reframing it and actually looking at how is it serving me rather than just sabotaging me. Yeah. And I think a lot of the time, like, for example, imposter syndrome could be seen as a sign of humility. It shows that you care. It shows that you want to do a good job. I always ask people, would you rather feel like this, or would you rather think this? Would you rather not care about this, promotion coming up or you hitting your target? Would you rather be nonchalant about it and then people call you out for being this way? Or would you rather feel like this? And people are like, actually, I would probably rather feel like this. Because I think, like imposter syndrome, the more we look at it as a negative, the more we create this perception around it. And then when we start to feel it, it creates more of that kind of fight, flight, fawn, or freeze moment in us. So I think one thing is looking for the benefits and also challenging your thinking around it. So the analogy, and you'll hear I use a lot of analogies, but your brain's a bit like a courtroom, and you've got the prosecution, which is your brain on sort of that risk management mode of going, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, this is going to go wrong, and it's can go into overdrive, and you can look for all that kind of confirmation bias around it. And what we've got to do, if you've experienced imposter syndrome, and 70% of us will experience it at some point of our lives, so it's very common, is challenge that thinking and create a defense. So it's almost going, well, where's the evidence that this thought is true, which is what the defense would ask in the courtroom. And then what else could be true in this situation? And how is this benefiting me? So those questions, by going into questions, and I'm going off into a bit of a tangent here, but just a side note, if you ask questions, your brain will look for possibilities. If you make statements in your head, it will look for sort of things to restrict you. It's a bit like a Google search engine. If you just type in limitation, if you type in statements, it's going to come back with evidence. Type in questions, it will come back with possibilities.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like the classic. You've got a numb right arm, right? So of course you go to Google. It's just like, what are the side effects of it?
Yeah.
You get what you search for, right? So again, it's about the mental. It's funny because it's like, you're talking about stuff there, which is, fear of getting fired, which of course holds people back a lot. Very much as well it's about limiting beliefs, right? People's limiting beliefs, which is again a topic in psychology and sometimes in coaching, which is something you cover a lot with people. That lack of confidence, again, another super highly used topic. What's not covered that much, and it's that little questioning thing at the end. I often usually play a game with people I call it fact or fiction. So when they're coming up with a sort of maybe a limiting belief, or they're coming up with a statement about something or someone, I always ask them to say, all right, well, just let's play fact or fiction for a second. Like what you just said there, is that a fact? Do you know that that's correct? Or is that fiction because you're just saying it because you think it? And that really helps people sort of reframe a little bit and rethink about it. It's like, well, they usually start off by going, well, it's definitely not fact. It's like, so the question's actually answered straight away because they're always like, well, it's definitely not fact, no. And then they spend a couple of moments there trying to figure out sort of, okay, what is it then? And then they realize, right, it's not fact, then it's fiction. So I found that helps people a lot there. So it's interesting sort of All right. So when it
just
comes
jumping
to
in there on that one, David, sorry, because other people might jump in and go, and I hear this all the time, is, oh, there is evidence because, this is when this happened on this call, or when this happened on this target. Like, well, how many calls have you had? Or how many times have you had that quarter or that end of month? And it's like, oh, well, it's only happened 4 out of 30 or 40 times. It's like, okay, well, let's flip it the other way. If you'd only had 4 good calls out of 40 calls, would you be thinking the next one's going to be good? No, you'd be thinking it's bad. Why? Because the majority have been bad. So in this case, the majority have been good. Why aren't you thinking the next one could be good?
Yeah, exactly. It's people always remember sort of the pain or the pleasure of obviously the past is usually always the strongest driver, right, with people's behavior. And I think as well, sort of, it's the same when people use a specific, maybe they've used a certain sales tactic on a cold call and it's worked. Like, they remember that because if it got them a good meeting and it's with a Fortune 500 or something, that sticks. They got, maybe there's some pleasure out of it. They was in the office, it had a big impact, and they stick with that and remember it. And it's exactly the same with negative stuff as well, right? If they had a really bad day and something happened and they had a bad call and messed something up, that sticks with them, and it's obviously takes a while to drill that out, right?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, cool. So imposter syndrome. So what would be your number one tip there for avoiding imposter syndrome?
I think first of all, reframing it and looking at how it's benefiting you, and secondly, challenge your thinking. Ask, where is the evidence? What else could be true here in those situations? And then take that thing that you're fearing, that negative what if is what I call it, and go, right, what is it trying to tell me? Because all emotions are signals, they're not threats. It's a bit like a smoke alarm going off in the house. It's not on fire. It's just saying, hey, you need to pay attention to me. So it's actually going, what is this trying to tell me? It's trying to tell me I'm feeling like this because I don't know enough about this meeting coming up. Okay, well, what's 1 or 2 things I can do to reduce the chance of that happening? Go and research this person, research the questions they might ask. It's actually going, well, if you look at it as a way of a trigger trying to tell you something, a bit like when we're thirsty, you're going, hey, you need to drink some water. We don't go, oh my God, I hope I don't get thirsty today. But when we do get thirsty, we don't go, what would happen if I didn't drink for a week or 2? We see it as a signal, and it's kind of reframing that in a similar way.
Yeah, got it. What's the typical response you get from salespeople when you introduce them to this? Because I mean, we've been salespeople. I know I was stubborn as hell when I was younger. It was only when I grew up and witnessed and went through some of these challenges for myself, I started to maybe listen to people a bit more. What's the classic response in your experience from different types of salespeople? What you usually get from this kind of advice?
I think first of all, it's how it's framed, because I never want to position it as advice. It's more like, as we talked about, the kind of coaching and getting someone to come to that conclusion themselves. And I suppose, and this is the feedback I've had, is that I deliver these kind of things without making someone feel like I'm patronizing them, or I think particularly with this kind of stuff, or even mental health, is sometimes people want to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
And that can really switch people off, particularly in sales. Is you don't want to be like that. You want to really simplify a lot of this stuff and make everyone go, oh, that's so obvious. Like, and make people feel like what you've just told me isn't amazing. Like it's just you've reframed something, and that's all I want to do. I'd never want to sort of be seen as this, wow, like, oh my God, like I've never thought of it that way. As people probably have, but they just haven't put it in that sort of framing before. So it's really positive, I think, because a lot of people start to recognize, oh, actually, I have got more control of this. I don't just have to let this happen to me. I can do something about it.
Yeah, got it. So just for the audience, just so you know, that means that Chris actually knows the difference between coaching and training, unlike about 99% of the other people on the phone. All right, Chris, what's next in the most frequently sort of used topics, what you're covering with people? You got imposter syndrome. What else is really commonly a topic you cover with people?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on limiting beliefs, dealing with stress and anxiety is a big one. Burnout, of course. Habits is a kind of golden thread that people don't realize. I think we talk a lot about goal setting, but not enough about habit setting. And particularly in sales, we can get very focused on the outcome and not actually, well, what's the tangible thing to get there. So, and then motivation as well, which I think is something that's very misunderstood and people sort of miss things around.
Yeah. So habits. Let's talk about that one, because that's also a very interesting topic. Habits and what kind of habits people have, and again, when it comes to habits, then there's positive and negative ones, right?
Yeah, and I think about 55% of our daily routine is built by habits. Which is why when COVID happened, everyone started working from home. It wasn't so much Zoom fatigue that was taking over. It was we just didn't have any habits. We had no routine. So our brain is having to be consciously on throughout the day, which is what's draining it consistently around that. So going back to your point earlier about adding variety, that's why it's so important. But habits are, whenever I'm running a session or working with people, it's going, great, okay, this is the goal, but what's the tangible habit? Like that's the controllable. The more we talk about habits, the more we focus on the controllables, and then we can get to that goal. But it's actually going, well, what can you do? Like, how are you going to implement this? Everyone goes, it's easier said than done. Yes, everything is easier said than done. But it's going, well, okay, the sooner we start working on a habit, the sooner we can actually get you to that point.
Yeah. So what are some of the most sort of common, let's say, unhealthy habits what people have who you work with? And obviously, what do you take them to?
I suppose unhealthy habits is, well, one of the things is like just constantly being on, like, having your I mean, one thing I did which really helped me was not have my phone in my bedroom. I've done that for like 3 or 4 years now, and it's been such a game changer of not being that habit of picking it up first thing in the morning and checking it, or in the night when you think you can't sleep, or before bed. It's been a really good thing for me. But I think people that kind of constantly feeling on, having Slack and emails and your phone open all day, and then thinking, why am I not being as effective as I could be? Is well, look at all the noise that's going on around you. And I think what a lot of people miss as well is when they are trying to deal with bad habits in their life, they think they can erase them, but you can't erase a bad habit. You've got to replace it with something. So if you had one of your favorite meals in front of you right now and I took it away, you're just going to be thinking about that. And that's why New Year's resolutions don't work, is we just try and stop doing something. And it's like, what are we start doing? And it's this links to what I talked about before about that kind of towards versus away motivation. Is if it's away motivated, I want to stop doing this, I want to do less of this. If you don't have anything to replace it, you're not going to be able to do that. Your brain might do it for a small period, but eventually you'll go back to that habit.
Yes. Yeah, funny. Let me share with you a little story, because I think the audience will benefit from this, because I can literally tap into both of those things and give a really concrete example. Because like I said, I've I've started to get my ass off the chair and go out and do some exercise in the last 10 days. But I also tried to do a couple of decisions over the last few months since I went back to running my own business. The first one was actually stop drinking. Yeah, so I was just like, I know it was because I went out, we did a big night, we literally got in at whatever, 2, 3 in the morning. It was a weekday. And up until that date, I'd been just full on, switched on, trying to get the business up and running, do the website, all that. You know what it's like. Yeah, you're literally doing everything. There's always something to do. And the day after, I was literally hungover the day after, as we always are. I usually always say the day after is the worst one, because that's where the headache comes, where you feel really bad. And then, but the thing, what frustrated me the most was the fact that even on that day there, because I felt, right, if I sleep, if I drink a lot of water, the hangover won't be as bad, and tomorrow, I'll be okay. So it'll only be one day's hangover. And I found myself on that day after the day after, I was trying to work and I didn't have a hangover. I felt okay because I'd hydrated well, I was good. But my brain just wouldn't function. Just wouldn't function at all. I was just like, damn. I was just like, how many unproductive days of the year do you have if you go out drinking consistently? It's like, because even if you go do it on a Saturday, Sunday's going to be a hangover, Monday's probably also going to be shit. And most people don't like Mondays anyway, right? So of course, I made this decision there to right, I'm going to stop drinking. But that's exactly what you're talking about. I made a decision that I'm going to stop drinking. I didn't make a decision that I'm going to do this instead of going out drinking.
Yeah.
I made that up as I went along. So then all of a sudden I'm getting an invite. Hey man, you want to catch up for a couple of beers and some food? Nothing heavy, but whatever. And I was just like, then I kind of was like, yeah, I need to tell him not drinking. Yeah, sure, I'll come out, but I won't be drinking anything. You get the typical what. And it was like, I then started to question myself. And to be honest, the most positive thing in a way was instead of just stopping, then for me, it was just about cutting back and just saying, right, I can go out and I can just have 1 or 2 drinks, because I don't have, that's what all alcoholics say, right? I don't have a drinking problem. I can control my drinking and I can make a decision sort of, how much I drink. And I don't see drinking as a problem for myself. So it's not like I'm a raving alcoholic and that's why I stopped. It's just because I was like, this is unproductive. I need to get my business off the ground. I can't afford 20, 30 days unproductivity in the year. Unproductivity, is that even a word? I don't know. But that's one example of me trying to stop something. Whereas when it came to sort of the health kick and the getting out, my decision there was, yes, based on the fact that I was just I knew I was going to put on weight because I knew I'd be back at home. I'm not traveling back and forth in the morning. I'm not getting much exercise. And then when I could sort of feel it happening, see it happening in the mirror, then I was like, right, no, that's it. I need to go on a diet. I need to make my diet healthy and I need to go out. So then that was the opposite mind of thinking, right? And that was easy to stick to, because then I was straight away, meal prep, right? What am I eating instead of the other crap what I've been eating? And I prepped it and I went out there, I got the meals, I got the food. And then I just started to work on that and make that food better and go out and do the daily habit of walking. So of course, that worked 100%. The drinking piece didn't. And I bullied myself a little bit for it in the beginning, right? The classic, whether it's the imposter syndrome, right? Bullied myself.
Yeah.
Oh, why do I suck so much? I can't stop drinking. I promised myself I would stop drinking, but I've not done it. But that's because I didn't really need to, and I didn't see the motive, and I didn't think of what do I replace it with? Because it's one thing, you can't really replace a beer with water in that kind of frame. But that just goes to, I think that gives a good example of 2 things there. What I did, what was sort of achieved in a very different way, right? The strategy was very different in order to get there.
Yeah, I think one thing that really, I at one point gave up drinking for about 18 months, nearly 2 years. Did it as a bit of an experiment. And one thing that really helped me was, and I always encourage people to do this with any habit, is say, I don't rather than I can't. Yeah. So it's self-talk is such a pivotal thing in everything we do. I don't know if you've heard the stat of how many words per minute on average our self-talk is, but we can speak about 130 words per minute. We can type about 70 words. Our self-talk is about 800 to 1,200 words per minute. So there's a lot of noise going on up there. And, if you say to someone, I don't. If you say I can't involves willpower, and I can't, and then this is where that kind of self-sabotage and judgment comes in of yourself, of more likely to do it. For example, a vegetarian says, and a bit different, but I don't eat meat. No one goes, oh, go on, try some. But you don't.
Yeah.
That's my identity. So it might be, if people are listening to this, one thing that helped me, like in the week or certain days, I'd be like, I don't drink on these occasions anymore. I don't do this. You know, and I went on a bit of the health kick similarly, actually, just before I'd started Sales Psyche. And a few other habits that helped me was, you know, when I was hungry, I'd tell myself, oh, actually, whenever I'm hungry, the habit I want to implement is I'm going to have a glass of water and then wait 10 minutes. And if I'm still hungry, I can eat. And I never was. And I would always have a glass of water for dinner, but I'd never told myself I couldn't do something. It was always about like, you can if you want, but here's an alternative. And I made a really big sort of intention around that, and lost, I think, around 16, 17 kilos from it, just from it all came down to habits. It all came down to habits, and how I felt, not how I looked, was the big thing. Sort of, I asked myself every day, how do you feel? How do you feel from this? Don't judge it on how you look straight away, because if you do, you'll probably want to give up.
Yeah, that's it. The feeling is the most powerful thing, right? That's definitely the most powerful thing. You can, and it's always the same, right? It's like whenever you've not been to the gym for years, you kind of know in your head. It's like, oh, I just know when I get back, I know how good I'm going to feel. It's not when I get back, I know how good I'm going to look in the mirror. It's always like, I remember that good feeling after you finally just get back in that gym for that first day. How good does it feel after that first workout?
Yeah. And that's the thing, which is one of the key things about when you're trying something new or trying something, anything, even when you go to sales, is the natural reaction is for us to judge how we feel right now. But it's thinking, how am I going to feel at the end of it? It's linked to something called the motivation trap, is that we believe that we need to have motivation to do something, when in reality, by doing something, we can get motivation from it. So, you know, when you look at the habits you've built, there'll be people listening to this that run regularly or go to the gym. You don't feel like it some days, but you still go. And at the end of it, you feel great. And that's a great example of not being motivated doing something, because habits don't rely on emotions. They overpower them. They don't need them to respond. So whether it's prospecting, whether it's emails, whether it's a proposal you're working on, don't try and think, how am I going to feel having done this versus how I feel now? Because it also helps with things like procrastination as well. Yeah.
And I would also, just to add a third, fourth, fifth, whatever point we're on right now, like structure, right? Habit and structure are very much hand in hand. Like for me to be able to change like the diet and the exercise regime, I had to change my entire day structure. And that had a lot of knock-on effects, positive ones. It did mean that I have to go to bed early. I can't stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning working. I still do, but of course, then I'll just, maybe you've got to be flexible as well, right? It's about not beating yourself up because, oh, damn, I didn't get, like this morning, I didn't get out and go for my normal sort of 90-minute power walk in the morning. I didn't get up at 6 because I did my walk in the afternoon yesterday because it didn't fit into my schedule, right? So it's kind of like, so long as you're flexible enough to be like, not bully yourself into thinking, damn, I failed. It's got to be flexibility and goal setting all of the time, right? So you don't feel like that. Therefore, it motivates you to carry on and doesn't feel like a defeat. But I think also in the sales day, right? It's structure, habit. I think habit and structure go hand in hand, right? It's about, right, I'm gonna, in order to do this, I need to change this. I need to make sure I go to bed early, because if I don't, I can't get up at 6 o'clock. If I can't get up at 6 o'clock, I'm not gonna have time to do my 90-minute walk before work. Then I'm going to move into my work day, which is going to take a chunk out of my work day, which I've already cut short because I have to go to bed at 10 o'clock. Therefore, it all messes everything up. So it kind of like then almost forces you in a way to stick to that habit. And you kind of like, no, this is what I do. This is my day. This is what, and that then I think is more like the can't changes to that, you know, I don't do that. I don't go and I don't take meetings at 9 o'clock in the evening or whatever. So it's, I think habit and structure are definitely a big part of this change if people are going to make it, right. And you hear about that all the time from, you know, when you ask most top performing SDRs and things these days, the topic what comes up all the time is like structure. Have a structure in your day. Make sure your call blocks are here, your prepping's here, and you make sure you do that same thing time in, time out, because repetition, of course, is what gets you to the end game of the results in the end.
And it links to something I've been talking about more recently, which is energy management as well is that we talk a lot about time management, but not enough about energy management. We've almost become time obsessed. But, you know, put it in a nutshell, you could give yourself 2 hours to get from A to B on a journey, but if you haven't got enough fuel in the tank, you're not getting there. And structure is important, but, you know, different tasks require different amounts of energy. And also it's about assessing how much energy you have to start with, and then how are you conserving it and how are you recharging it. So a bit like your phone battery, you'll wake up some days 100% more likely, 40, 50%, maybe if you've been out drinking the weekend, 20%.
Yeah.
And it's thinking the different tasks you have that day are like apps on your phone, they will drain your battery. And it's also a good way to be intentional with like controllables and uncontrollables of where are you spending your time and energy. And often we will wait. A really simple example of this, we'll wait until we need a break. We'll think, oh, I'm in the zone, you know, and we'll wait and we'll get to like maybe 1 or 2 and think, oh, I haven't had a break, I haven't had lunch. But for example, if you had your phone, would you let it go to 0 before charging it? Probably not. If you, and I normally ask this question, but it's probably changed at the moment. If you had your car, would you let it go to 0 before refueling it? You probably would at the moment, but typically you wouldn't, because you'd have to be pushing it somewhere.
Yeah.
What we normally do is we might look at our phone and go, oh, it's a 50% now, but I know I'm going out this afternoon in the evening. If I don't charge it now, it's going to die. But we don't really think about that of our energy. We think, oh, I feel good now, but yeah, but what's going to happen? People are like, oh, I'm not an afternoon person. Is, well, if you've used your phone from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., it's obviously going to die. So it's the same as you. It's not that you're not an afternoon person. It's just that that's the limiting belief, is that you're not giving yourself those proactive breaks. Like, go and take one. I mean, even when we're thirsty, we're about 20 or 30% dehydrated, I believe. Yeah. So it's about building in those breaks and looking at your energy and going, where am I spending? Where am I investing my energy? Because the phrase time is money is important, but time is energy. Most important thing, and that is your biggest currency.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good point. Really good point. It's kind of like one of those questions. I think if you asked every salesperson, where do you get your energy from in a day?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, exactly.
Not many would have an answer for that, right? Or the answer would be sort of superficial, probably. Right. Yeah, I get it from my team. Everyone on the phone, or power hour or something like that, right? But, well, no, because power hour kind of it's energetic in the moment, but that's draining you of energy. Where do you get the energy from to replace that what you've just burnt for the last hour, 2 hours?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Super important point. Out of interest, the clients what you deal with and the people you speak with, how many of them are sort of management compared to like salespeople? I don't know whether you focused particularly on anyone, so you probably have a certain target audience. But that's
a mix, yeah. So obviously companies pay us like a sort of subscription fee to work with them. So we'll work across the board, really, from brand new BDRs, SDRs, AEs, CSMs, all the way up to VPs and managers. And, you know, that's one thing I really emphasize is when we do come in, is that I want managers to be part of these sessions. I want them to be part of the training. Or I want them to be able to access the one-to-ones, because it's all very well me talking about this, for example, and there's people listening to this from sales, but if management don't adopt it, then you are working within a kind of constricted environment as well from it. And, you know, we talked about this at the start about the kind of old school mentality, but I put a post out, I think a few weeks ago, I said back in the day, salespeople didn't talk about their mental health. I said, well, back in the day, doctors used to prescribe cigarettes to people. So, you know, it just because it used to happen doesn't mean it's right. Like, we evolve, we change. And I think people are like, oh, 20 years ago, you know, I used to crack on. It's like, yeah, but we've evolved. We better understand things now. We are able to, and there's more things going on. You know, we're more switched on than ever before with social media and other pieces around it. And sales is, when you're in sales, it's a big part of your life. And there is that kind of moral obligation there to recognize that you are responsible for someone, and you've got to create that kind of environment for them. And it's important, not just something to neglect. It's a bit like, and the question I get is, not often, but I hear it, and I've in the past particularly, oh, if we start talking about mental health more, is it going to give people excuses? But imagine when we first started talking about physical health, whether people going, oh, but people might say they've got a stomach bug, or they might say they've got the flu. Is people are probably saying that right now to you, but it probably isn't that. It probably is their mental health, but they don't feel comfortable talking about it. And it's more dangerous to let that go on behind closed doors where they don't feel like they can, because that's when they feel like they're the odd ones out and they don't belong in that role or that company or in sales.
Yeah, so really good point, because that's like, I mean, how many times have you in your younger days, have you taken a day off because you didn't feel like going in? It wasn't because you were cold or you had a migraine or whatever, it's because you didn't feel like going in because you was in a bad place.
Yeah. And I think maybe even back then, we didn't even realize it. You know, the more I look to understand my anxiety and mental health now, I probably look back and go, actually, I didn't even connect the dots at the time because it wasn't something I spoke about. I just wasn't feeling myself. And I think there's probably so many people actually, if they reflect back to the days where they didn't go in, it probably might not have been this really obvious physical piece, but it probably was something linked to that. You just didn't have a label for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that obviously goes to show how far we've come, right, with awareness of mental health. Even in the past 5 years, I think it's been fantastic, and people are speaking about it more. So that's awesome. Anxiety. Let's talk about that for a minute. You mentioned obviously performance anxiety being one particular form of anxiety you're talking about and covering. I think, at least in my experience and my thought process, like anxiety is probably one of the most common mental health issues out there. What I think everybody struggles with, or at least witnesses, right? I don't think anybody sort of doesn't ever witness some form of anxiety, whether that's at home or at work. But you know, I mean, anxiety when it comes to sales, first and foremost, I think when you think about every part of getting a sales job, interviewing, having your first day, making your first cold call, trying to compete with your teammates, all of that stuff, like that there literally just triggers anxiety left, right, and center, right? So talk to me about sort of anxiety and try and share with the audience sort of like what's the most common trends you find with people when it comes to anxiety, and what's the best way of people to deal with that, handle it?
Yeah, I think the most common things is that performance anxiety of particularly, you know, going back to zero every quarter or even every month with some companies, and constantly feeling like, oh, am I, you know, is this person or like deals that you're working on, are they going to be pushed back? Are they going to fall out of pipeline? All those kind of things. And then the anxiety of, you know, how am I being judged? And I think when we went to a more remote world, that was even harder because people didn't have that kind of visual recognition and reassurance from their managers and leaders. People weren't taking breaks as much because it's like, oh, I feel guilty taking lunch while I'm at home. Is you do it in the office, but because there's not everyone else around, you can't model that behavior. So there are all the variety of things, but how you handle it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about that signal rather than a threat. Is starting to recognize, well, what's this trying to tell me? And that's one thing that really helped me was when I was feeling anxious about my day. What we often do is we stay in that sort of primal mindset where our emotions start coming in and we start thinking about all the worst case scenarios. Well, you know, if you're anxious about a meeting coming up, if you're anxious about your target, first question, as I mentioned earlier, would you rather be anxious now? Would you rather be anxious last day of the month? Or would you rather be anxious once that meeting is over? Or when you get, probably now. And it's going, well, what's that anxiety making you think about? Well, it's probably making you think about who's going to be in that meeting, what kind of questions they're going to ask. You might be anxious about not knowing enough, or what are you anxious about not knowing about? Let's drill down into that. What are one or two things you can do to build your confidence and better understanding around that? What are some of the questions you're anxious about them asking? Okay, well, let's go and find out the answers beforehand. Who are you anxious that might be in that meeting? Okay, how can you research them beforehand? And then going into that meeting and actually going, oh, do you know what? If I wasn't anxious, I probably wouldn't have researched that question or researched that person. Or I probably wouldn't have done a bit more reading around, you know, the types of questions they're going to ask. And what we don't do a lot of the time is we'll feel that sort of apprehension beforehand, but we don't then reflect on it afterwards and go, A, do all those big bad things I thought might happen? Probably not. And B, look at all the benefits that came from me feeling like that at the start. Because then what we can start to do over time is when that comes up again, rather than going, oh no, I'm anxious, is going, oh, you know, look how it benefited me last time. Going back to the thirst example before, is we see this as a, you know, thirst in itself could be quite a scary thing if we looked in a different way, going, oh my God, like my body's telling me I need to drink. And if I don't, I'm going to dehydrate and die. Like that's a very dangerous thing. We don't see it like that. We see it as, oh, okay, I'm thirsty, I need to get some water.
Yeah.
And it's getting to that point. It's a bit like public speaking as well. A lot of people will feel this fear and tenseness, and then as soon as it's over, like, oh, but they don't really solve anything. They'll go back the same loop every time. It's going, what's it trying to tell me? And rather than just sitting in that story, go through those questions and look to understand, and then use it as a signal to gain something, to develop something, to build on it. And then over time, you can build a level of gratitude around it.
Yeah. It's
just sorry, David, just to caveat that point,
Yeah,
obviously,
sure.
I'm not talking about all types of anxiety there. There are obviously that are more like there's obviously a scale. I'm talking about the kind of ones that maybe aren't medically diagnosed or aren't your sort of OCDs or other types of anxiety, that PTSDs and all those kind of things. Obviously, that's a very different story. But if
Yeah,
it's that kind of,
that's a much more complex story if we dig into that. We
yeah,
need at least another hour or 2 hours for that one, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It's funny. It's very sort of associated to, like, a lot of this stuff is like NLP, covered in like NLP, right? Neuro linguistic programming, and it's about like creating a positive association to something. It's probably the most important piece, right? It's funny as well. I also use with anxiety. One of the things I use, I used to be, one of the things I was good at when I was younger was like football, and I was never anxious about football. That was always fine. But I was also a sprinter. So I was like 100 and 200 meter sprinter. And if you want to understand anxiety and how to sort of change your frame of mindset on it, I always like, whenever I watch athletics and I watch the 100-meter race or even 200, right? You look at the faces of those athletes and you know what they're witnessing there is anxiety, but they've reframed it. Because I always say anxiety and adrenaline are pretty much the same thing in that scenario. And it's just about how you use them. Because I always remember, like, no matter at least in the first couple of years until I got a bit slower and everybody started getting taller than me in school, I used to win every time and I knew I would win. But that didn't mean at the beginning of a race. That actually probably gave me more anxiety, if you like, at the beginning of a race. But I used that. And I sort of tried to turn that. This isn't anxiety. I didn't think, oh my God, I'm going to lose. It was just like I would use that and feel the build up, because that for me, I associate anxiety with adrenaline, and I associate adrenaline with what gets me off the starting block fast, because I'm holding it in, and I'm going, boom, I'm going. So, and it's the same thing I use as well with, I always talk about cold calling anxiety, because I think that's probably one of the most common things people struggle with it as an SDR in particular. And the funny thing is about cold calling as well, it's even like even if you've been in sales 20 years, right? If you've not picked up the phone for a while and somebody's like, yeah, come on, give us a phone call, call this guy. Like, instantly anxiety kicks in, right? And it's like, and my response to that when I moved into sales, like I always associated it to the same thing. It's like, it's just adrenaline. It's not like, oh, I'm anxious. It was more like, yeah, okay, keep breathing like that. Let's go. Give me the phone. And I just did it. And that was what, and it's always the same. You get past that first conversation. I'm not going to say the first dial, because hitting the switchboard doesn't help. Hitting that first conversation, having that first conversation, put the phone on. It's like, all right, yeah, next. And then the anxiety's gone completely. So I always talk about just not letting the anxiety build up, because the longer you let it build up for, the worse it gets. And then you eventually get to that moment where you're just crippled and you're never going to pick up that phone, or you're going to do whatever it is you're anxious about doing, right? So it's just about reframing it, putting a positive association to it, and treating it like adrenaline is always one of the things I talk about as well.
Yeah, and anxiety is often stems from uncertainty. So going through those questions is, how do I create more certainty around this situation, even if I've never done it before? How do I build more of an understanding? Because that in itself will then reduce the anxiety from it. And anxiety is okay to feel. It's good. It's good to be anxious about something, because if you weren't, it shows, again, you might go into it nonchalant and not caring, and then you slip up and so on. So yeah, it's a positive thing, and we'll get confidence as a result of doing it.
Yes, definitely. All right, I can see we're sort of we've run past our normal 45, but if you've got time, I've got a couple more just questions what I wanted to ask, just to wrap up really. And the first one is, what can companies do today to sort of help their salespeople feel more comfortable about opening up about mental health?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think first of all, address the elephant in the room, particularly with new starters. So, we'll often talk about, this is where the company's going, this is what we're selling, this is our plans, our vision, but talk about the stuff that they might experience on the flip side, like after a few weeks of being there, or when their first deal falls through, and talk about those kind of things and go, look, this is going to happen. And when you feel like that, that's okay. Like, come and speak to me about it. It's perfectly natural. Because if you don't, people go through this and they think, oh, everyone else has been like in this really, and this can go too far of like toxic positivity, and everyone's like, no one's mentioned this to me, so maybe I'm the odd one out, maybe I don't belong. Like, they said all this great stuff would happen, but no one said I'd feel like this. So I think address the elephant in the room. I think secondly, provide avenues for people to be able to talk. So
Yeah.
managers, not just managers, but other avenues, whether it's people like myself with Sales Psyche, EAPs, lunch and learns, just spaces for people to be able to go and talk with one another about this. And once I've seen this with the sessions we do, once you put a label above the door of, we're talking about limiting beliefs today, or we're talking about imposter syndrome, people will talk about this.
Yeah.
Maybe not straight away, but they will when you provide the space for them to do so. And also make it the focus of your one-to-ones, not just this thing at the end of, oh, how have you been? How you doing? No one wants to do that when you've been talking about 50 minutes of performance. Ask them at the start, like, how have you been? What's on your mind? On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling right now? Don't just go with the how are you, because it's a very generic question. And recognize people won't open up straight away if you haven't done it before. They might be thinking, is this a trap? Give them the space, be consistent with it, and even just run one. If sometimes that session needs to be about that, park your agenda, make it about them, and even give them those sessions where it is just about their agenda. It is just about their mental health and their mindset rather than yours and performance. So those are some of the things in a nutshell, really.
Yeah. So it's funny actually, because you associate, especially I particularly associate, of course, I've made a lot of progress with people on mental health when they feel comfortable that they're having a confidential conversation with me. I know I've been paid off. I know I've been brought in as a coach in a company, as a sales coach, and I've been paid, a big amount of money off the CEO, whoever, to bring me in. And I know I've sat there in so many sessions thinking, if he knew the conversation I was having with this person right now, because he wouldn't understand it, he would probably fire me and get rid of me, because he doesn't know this is what he's paying me for. But of course, what he doesn't realize is that, like, you need to get past that mental hurdle in order to be able to perform, right? And that's what I've always focused on. But so I always associate that as being super powerful. It's the fact that I create a comfortable environment for people to be able to open up and feel comfortable about, if I tell this guy I have anxiety issues or some form of mental health problems, I'm not going to get fired because nobody else knows.
Yeah.
What you're saying here is also a different scenario. And I think especially much more usable for somebody who maybe doesn't, let's say a sales leader who doesn't have the experience to be able to have a conversation like that with somebody. It's funny because it triggered a thought process in my mind of, if you have a group session, let's say a sales leader's in a group session with 10 people, and let's say he's of the opinion of, like, if you're weak, if you've got mental health issues, you're weak. But yeah, let's talk about stress or anxiety today. And I think then if he watches that room all of a sudden open up, because it always takes that one brave person to put their hands up and say, yeah, I'll speak first, right? Share their experience. I think people will relate definitely to some of those examples. And then you can probably tell me from your experience, right? And then I guess, like, that makes everybody else comfortable. And then all of a sudden you've got 5 out of 10 people who feel comfortable in a room, and that sales leader can sit there and be like, oh, okay, now it's not just 1 or 2, it's actually half of my team who actually suffers from this.
Yeah. I think if that sales leader goes into that scenario, probably very rarely would people put their hand up. So it has to come from the top. And I know a few companies who will go round and they'll do this once a month or every couple of weeks. They'll go round and share, like, what's sort of filling up their, what I call, like, stress container. But the most senior person in the room will go first, then the next senior person, then the next senior person. Brilliant. So it's done by how long you've been there or your position within the company, because what it's doing is kind of giving permission to people who haven't been there as long to go, oh, this person opened up about this. And that makes me feel more comfortable. And, I think one of the classic examples of this is you sit in Mental Health Awareness Week. You see people put on their Instagram stories or LinkedIn. This is what we're talking about this week. And the one thing I say to people is, how do you if you want to do something, do what you did that week and think, how do we make that consistent? Like, how do we do that all year round? Because there's nothing worse than not doing it for a week, posting on LinkedIn. You're doing more harm than good, because everyone there is probably thinking, well, you don't do this with us. You're just doing this because you want to attract new people, or jumping on this kind of, trend of virtue signaling and all that kind of thing. So actually going, well, how do we make this consistent? Rather than going, we'll offer yoga that week, or we'll do some, like, meditation sessions, or we'll get someone like myself in, or someone who's going, well, how do you do that in the long run? Like, how do you build consistency?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, coaching in particular, regardless of whatever type of coaching it is, like, unless you're committed to it in the long run, it's not a short-term solution. Like, training is for short-term solutions. Coaching, like, yes, some people will have an instant impact after one session. Sometimes that'll make a massive difference. But the majority of people, it can take you, like, it can literally take you 6 hours of coaching, 6 sessions with one person to reach the same point what you reach within 10 minutes with another, right? So it really depends on the person. So you have to be in it for the long run, and completely get you with that. I felt like that with Mental Health Week. Feel like that with Pride. It's kind of like, yeah, let's all do a blast, and everyone changes their logos to same with the Ukraine, right? Everyone changes their logo colors or put the rainbow colors on there. And it's like, well, that's just sort of promoting the fact that, yeah, we only need to talk about this for a week or a month or whatever it is. And then we can kind of like, yeah, that's that done. And we can forget about it until next year. And it's not a long-term solution, right? It's not a functional solution what's going to work in the long term. Cool. So finally, what's your message to anyone out there struggling with the mental health and feeling stuck right now?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things to do is to talk, but that will be one of the hardest things you'll have to do, is recognizing that finding those people, finding those avenues is, rather than thinking people don't want to know, or we've kind of got into this mentality in the last couple of years of, well, at least I'm not as worse off as someone in Ukraine, or someone who I know had their family member pass away from COVID. That's not what this is about. Like, everyone's challenges and what's ever going on in your head, it's not about comparison here. It's about just acknowledging that people would rather you tell them something than rather hear. And I don't know if you follow UFC, but Paddy Pimblett, after his fight, said that his friend had actually killed himself. He did that, and he said, I'd rather have my mate cry on my shoulder than go to his funeral next week. And I think that's the biggest thing here. And I'm not saying that everyone's in that sort of position, but obviously it can get to that point. And I think it's about recognizing that people would rather, your family and friends, and even flipping it the other way, if they were going through something, they would rather you, or you'd rather they speak to you and tell you about that than try and keep it to themselves.
Yeah. So talk. Yeah, indeed. Chris, it's been fantastic. I'm positive everybody's going to give me a really good positive reaction to this. And you may expect me to come knocking on your door again to do a round 2 of this for sure.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'll definitely try and gather as much feedback and comments as possible on this episode when it gets published later this week. And then definitely, I think we should have a round 2 for certain. I'd love to keep pushing this topic and raising the awareness of it with you. I think what you're doing is fantastic.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, David, and thanks for everyone for listening. And if anyone listening to this wants to reach out of any things I've talked about, feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. Chris Hatfield, not Hadfield, the astronaut. It's Chris Hatfield.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Keep your eye out for this one, of course. I'll be publishing it this week. And we'll be back again with another episode soon. Bye for now.